Hi, you've come to the right channel if you love Scotland and all things Scottish. My name's Iain, and I invite you to join me here at Distinctly Scotland as I explore the beauty and wonder of this amazing wee country on my grand tour. Let me help you discover the history, the land, the culture of Scotland from a Scotsman's perspective. In this series of vlogs, I'll be travelling all across the country, exploring and discovering what makes this land so unique. From ancient castles, to battlefields, whisky distilleries, and to the architecturally magnificent structures found in both Scotland's cities and breathtaking countryside. Along the way, we'll also be experiencing the railways and the transport infrastructure. And I want to introduce you to the wonderful characters that over the centuries have made Scotland such a unique, special and diverse place. You know, there's so much more to Scotland than the boy wizard. This country is absolutely packed with history. So sit back, relax and join me on my grand tour of Scotland. My name's Iain, and I'm going to be showing you some of the most amazing sights in this wonderful country, Scotland. So join me on the grand tour. This is Distinctly Scotland, and you've joined us on our grand tour with me, Iain. Today's video is going to be about Edinburgh's ancient old town in two videos. Today will be part 1. I want to show you this beautiful and ancient part of the city, including St Giles, the Royal Mile, with all the fantastic closes off and fantastic statues along its 1.2 miles in length. We see the city chambers, where the Edinburgh Council sit, and of course, Diagon Alley, better known as Victoria Street here in Edinburgh. And we can't forget Greyfriars Bobby, the story of the devotion of a wee doggy. So we start our tour talking about St Giles. St Giles Cathedral lies in the heart of Edinburgh's Old Town, halfway down the Royal Mile, from the castle at the top to Holyrood Palace at the bottom. What we can see is the west side of St Giles Cathedral, with the area that was remodelled in 1887, and it has the most amazing depictions of characters, most especially that of St Giles himself. Well, here at the entrance to St Giles Cathedral, we have the most ornate carvings. This was all done in the 19th century when it was remodelled by Chalmers. Above the door here, we have St Giles himself. St Giles is depicted with the calf and the arrow through his hand, because he was the patron saint for the disabled. In these days they called it the cripples. And for lepers. Lepers weren't allowed to come into the church, but that's another story. St Giles was the son of Greek monarchs, who, as a hermit monk, withdrew deep into the forests in southern France, where in the greatest solitude he spent many years in prayer and herding deer. As a vegetarian, he eschewed the killing of animals for food, and whilst protecting his beloved hinds, shouted at the king's hunters, who had pursued his hind to its place of refuge. He shouted, "You can't kill an innocent creature of God." An arrow intended for the deer wounded St Giles through the hand, instead leaving him permanently disabled. 2 miracles were attributed to him, one that he cured a leper, and one that he helped a disabled man walk again. Therefore, he was made the patron saint of the disabled and lepers. It's said that as Edinburgh had lots in both categories, St Giles was the perfect choice for the patron saint. The building dates from 1124, has been extended in the 14th and the 16th century. It became in the 16th century the focal point for the Scottish Reformation, with its firebrand preacher John Knox. The church is regarded as the mother church of world Presbyterianism and welcomes visitors from all corners of the globe. St Giles is first and foremost a working church, but also welcomes visitors to experience the amazing history of the building. And today the church plays an important role in the cultural life of the city and the nation, playing host to a wide variety of concerts, lectures, exhibitions and civic ceremonies. Like most buildings in the Old Town, St Giles had significant alterations undertaken in the 19th and 20th centuries. In 1887, the west portal was changed under the wonderful Lord Provost of Edinburgh, William Chambers. And in 1911, the Thistle Chapel was added on the southeastern side. Let us now move out of the west door into West Parliament Square, where we can see the Signet Library in front of us and a little gap between the two buildings from St Giles into Parliament Square itself. This area of Parliament Square was originally a graveyard for prominent citizens of Edinburgh. However, when the Parliament moved in 1632 to Parliament House, the one you see in front of you, the bodies had to be removed to Greyfriars Cemetery some half-mile away. However, there was one grave that nobody wished to disturb, that of the firebrand preacher and architect of the Protestant Reformation, John Knox. The superstitious clergy believed him to be a messenger of God. So to this day, under Car Park 23, lie the remains of John Knox. And you can see the plaque that marks the approximate spot of his interment. However, he's very close to the church he loved and gave a great number of sermons, just by the beautiful south side face of the High Kirk of Scotland, or St Giles Cathedral. Parliament Square was created in 1632, and the building you're looking at is the Supreme Civil Court in Scotland, known as the Court of Session. So all the civil cases, if you're getting sued, you end up there. Scotland kept its own legal system after the Parliament went to London in 1707. So Scotland has its own separate legal system, and the Scots are very proud of that fact. In Parliament Square, there's a very interesting statue, the oldest statue in Scotland. Made in 1685, this life-sized statue of Charles II, dressed as a Roman centurion, was placed in Parliament Square and is a beloved statue which was repaired in 2011 because it had spent a very, very long time in the Scottish weather. So Charles II looks over Parliament Square with the Court of Session on one side and St Giles Cathedral on the other. This area is visited by many tourists, although not as many as other parts of Edinburgh. And as you can see, it is truly a beautiful, wonderful place. Now we can see the addition to St Giles Cathedral in 1911, which was the Thistle Chapel. And beside the Thistle Chapel is the statue of Braidwood, James Braidwood, who was the gentleman who created the first fire service in the world. And this statue was recently erected to promote the fact that this Scotsman had such an important impact in the world, creating the first fire service. And James Braidwood stands here with the Court of Session and the Thistle Chapel behind him on the east side of St Giles Cathedral, and he looks out towards the Market Cross and the City Chambers, where we'll be going next. The Market Cross, or Market Cross, has been a very important place in Edinburgh over the centuries, where executions and proclamations were made. Many hangings and burnings and hanging and quartering took place here, really rather gruesome. Today it's a place for tourists, really, and where tours start from. Famously, Bonnie Prince Charlie announced that he was the King of Scotland back in 1745 from this very spot. And as you can see, the insignia of Edinburgh, England and Scotland around the Market Cross, and the ubiquitous unicorn at the top, which was the favourite of Scottish kings for their coats of arms. So here at the Market Cross, we have the area of the old town where declarations were made. They would come and stand here and they would tell people what's happening. Royal proclamations. To this day, they still have royal proclamations. For example, when the Duke of Sussex and Meghan, his beautiful wife, had their baby, Archie, they announced that it used to take 4 days riding from London to Edinburgh. And to this day, they'll make the announcement 4 days later. Now, the important thing about the Market Cross is one of the punishments for thieves and just general miscreants, they used to come and have their ear nailed to the door. Now, can you imagine having your ear nailed to the door? After a few hours, you'd be a bit bored, and then as the night came on, you could die of exposure. So what they used to do was pull their ear off, which left a big gash in their ear, and they were marked. They were marked men. And a lot of these men, believe it or not, became pirates. And this is a story that one of the famous writers in Edinburgh, Robert Louis Stevenson, took up. Long John Silver. They always had a marked ear. Because you couldn't get a job if you were a marked man. Who was going to employ a criminal? Right here at the Market Cross. Leaving the Market Cross, we move on to the Royal Mile, or the High Street, and we can see a very famous statue coming up in front of us. This is the statue of one of the key figures of the Scottish Enlightenment, the father of economics, or the father of capitalism, the amazing Adam Smith. In 1776, he wrote a book entitled An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations, better known as the Wealth of Nations book. It was the first modern work on economics and laid the foundations to free market theory. There are now Adam Smith societies all over the world to promote the study of economics, the most prominent one being in Manhattan in New York City. He's widely regarded as one of the greatest economic thinkers, and ex-Fed chairman Alan Greenspan was quoted as saying that the Wealth of Nations was one of the great achievements in human intellectual history. Another great Scotsman with his amazing statue in the Royal Mile in the old town of Edinburgh. Across from Adam Smith is the City Chambers, and we enter here to see this beautiful neoclassical building with the amazing statue of Alexander and Bucephalus in the middle. This building was designed by the architect John Adam, who was the son of the famous William Adam, who basically built the whole of the new town of Edinburgh, but more of that later. So this building was commissioned in 1753 and delivered in 1760 and is now the City Chambers. It was originally the Royal Exchange. However, the people who used it didn't like it. They would rather do their trading at the Market Cross. So in 1893, the city took it as the City Chambers, and it's now the Edinburgh City Council, has been since 1996. It's been used for many filming locations, the famous Braveheart film by Mel Gibson, and most recently the television programme Belgravia. The statue in the middle of the square is a depiction of Alexander the Great and Bucephalus, created by the wonderful artist John Steele and commissioned in 1832. Alexander the Great and Bucephalus was from Greek mythology, and it was said that Bucephalus was untamable. Alexander tamed him and rode him to all his great victories in battle. Now the council commissioned Alexander Steele to make it and promised 100 guineas, which he would raise by public donation. He made the model for them, but the council produced 50 guineas only. Steele was not happy, and he said he'd give them the statue once they paid the 100 guineas. It took them 50 years to do so, and to get revenge for being kept waiting so long, he changed the horse's ears to pig's ears. The moral of the story being, don't mess with the artists. However, we leave the city chambers area back on to the high street, and we can see again the Market Cross and St Giles Cathedral. This area of the high street, or the Royal Mile, used to house the Luckin booths. The Luckin booths were small shops that were cleared away in the 19th century and before to smarten up the area. This was, as you understand, where most people in Edinburgh lived, the Old Town, surrounded by the Flodden Wall. It became very, very busy, the Old Town. So this was the centre of the world for people around St Giles, the Market Cross, and the Luckin booths were right along the north side of St Giles that you see here. Along the high street, closes would come off to each side where the people would live. And we continue along towards one of the closes. But as you can see now, it's become an area for tourists, and we have the typical tourist shops with all the little trinkets and fridge magnets and tartan scarves and all the things that you want when you come to visit Edinburgh, so they say. But one of the closes off the high street here is Advocates' Close. And the next part of our tour is to have a look at Advocates' Close and the way the people lived back in the day. So here in Advocates' Close, we can see this wedding lintel from 1590. From hope comes life. What a wonderful thought. This was made for this couple here, the initials of the couple, Helen and Graham. From hope comes life in 1590. This is a typical close in the old town of Edinburgh. We can see the wedding lintels as discussed. And interestingly enough, we can see the modern entry phone system alongside. They used to put an oyster shell in the wall to ward off witches. That was another superstition they had. But also you can see just how high the buildings were in the closes in Edinburgh, the first skyscrapers in the world. These tall buildings in the old town were required because Edinburgh had become a very cramped place. People were jammed within the Flodden Wall that surrounded the old town of Edinburgh, the Flodden Wall being built after the defeat by the English at the Battle of Flodden in 1513, a battle where James IV died. But Auld Reekie, as it became known, got the name because it smelt really bad. It was crammed with people, smoke, and the sanitation was really something else. People would throw the human detritus out of their windows and shout, "Gardez-le." Gardez-le from the French, "Regardez à l'eau," watch out for the water. Well, it would probably be a good idea not to look up early in the morning or late at night when they used to throw the detritus out. And it used to run down to the Norloch, which was the area to the north of the town, which currently has Princess Street Gardens and Waverley Railway Station. But Edinburgh has many, many closes, and if you come on one of my tours here at Distinctly Scotland, we will go around the old town investigating the closes all along the Royal Mile, which is in fact 1.2 miles long, but let's face it, they couldn't count or measure in the old days. But it is an ancient city. We now come out of Advocates Close back onto the Royal Mile, looking down towards the Tron Church, and we're facing the north side of St Giles Cathedral, and we're now looking at the area of West Parliament Square where we left St Giles before, and we see the statue of the Duke of Buccleuch and the back of the French consulate looking up to the church at the hub. As this is the central part of tourist Edinburgh, obviously we're going to have all the lovely shops to cater for all the needs of our visitors. From whisky to silk scarves, cashmere scarves, kilts, it's all here on the Royal Mile, and it's a fantastic place to visit, and I'm sure you will come here soon. But let's look at one of the more interesting shops just further along. So when you come to Scotland, you've got to try whisky, and there are many shops in Scotland that sell whisky. This specialist shop here in the Royal Mile could be a place to come. I'm going to be doing a specialist whisky video all about the history and the distilling of whisky, a major export for Scotland, and very, very enjoyable to drink. Now, we talked about whisky in Scotland, but one of the other important things, of course, are the bagpipes and our tradition of wearing the Highland dress. And here's a man who knows all about that. Hello, sir. I may say, you look fantastic today.
Thank you very much.
With your fine... tell me, what tartan is it you're wearing today?
This is a Seaforth Mackenzie.
The Seaforth Mackenzie.
Yeah.
And is that linked to one of the regiments of Scotland?
The Seaforth Highlanders. It's my favourite regiment of all time.
Yeah, I'll bet.
It's sort of like a tribute to them.
Very good. Well, I must say you're looking magnificent. And this is a special hat that you wear.
Yes.
And this is the red hackle.
Yep, that's correct.
This is the red hackle. And today in Edinburgh, it's unusual to have quite a hot, warm day.
Yep.
And this man you must be sweating there, lad.
Certainly am. I wouldn't get too near.
No, you're fine. And you've got your bagpipes in the back. I just wish we had heard you playing the pipes.
Of course, yeah.
Where did you learn the bagpipes?
Well, it was quite a funny story, actually. My dad is a big Hearts fan, Heart of Midlothian.
A Jambo?
A Jambo, yeah, that's what they call them. And he was just at the football one day, and I used to get in a little bit of bother when I was younger, and he wanted to get me away from all that, so he just decided, right, he went to the football and he bumped into a guy called Bobby Pinkman, and he just so happened to be a world-class piper, you know.
Fantastic.
And then they got speaking, and then basically my dad said to him, I want to get my laddie away from the trouble, you fancy teaching him? And then that's how it all came to be.
So playing the bagpipes got you out of trouble?
Oh, certainly did.
Wow, that's a story.
Yeah.
Well, listen,
wasn't that bad though.
Delightful to meet you.
Yep.
I won't shake your hand because this is 2020 and we're not allowed to do that. But I'll bump your arm.
Yeah, of course.
And thank you very much for joining us on my grand tour of Scotland.
You're welcome.
Thank you, sir.
You take care, okay?
It's okay. You'll be forgiven for not understanding what the gentleman was saying. He has got quite a broad Scottish accent. Basically, he took up playing the pipes to get himself out of trouble, and his dad had put him in touch with a top piper. But when you come to Scotland, you'll start to understand how we speak. So here, still on the Royal Mile, the one place you don't want to end up in Scotland is here, the High Court of Justiciary. We talked about the Court of Session, the highest court for civil cases. Well, this is the highest court in Scotland for criminal cases. So all the worst criminals in Scotland are tried here. Now, very interesting that outside the High Court, here in the Royal Mile, we have a statue of the very famous 18th century philosopher, a name I'm sure you'll recognise, David Hume. Now, David Hume was at his time quite an unusual person, because in the 18th century, the Bible was everything. But he was the first empiricist, and he believed that you couldn't believe anything unless you saw the proof. And David Hume decided that without proof, it wasn't in fact real. For example, the miracles. But David Hume's philosophy was one of the finest thinkers of the 18th century in the Scottish Enlightenment. And he is here outside the High Court because it's all about evidence and proving the empiricism of all facts. The wonderful David Hume. And when you come to Edinburgh, for a touch of good luck, you must touch his toe. This is a famous thing to do. Now, if you touch the toe 5 times, you get really good luck. 25 times. David Hume was one of the giants of the Scottish Enlightenment of the 18th century. Frankly, there's not enough time here to cover the scope of his amazing, groundbreaking theories and the influence he had on the world. Born in 1711, within 100 yards of this statue, he became one of the most influential philosophers of not only the 18th century, but of all time. The great German philosopher Immanuel Kant stated that Hume had, quote, awakened him from his dogmatic slumber. Albert Einstein stated that Hume's positivism inspired his theory of special relativity. It's hard not to state the incredible influence that this Scottish gentleman had on the world. And it's fitting that his statue sits in the heart of Edinburgh's Old Town, outside the High Court, so close to where he not only was born, but worked and socialised. Turning away from the Royal Mile, we now move towards the building in front, which is in fact the French consulate. This was formerly the headquarters of Lothian Regional Council, built in 1905. The street that we're on is actually in large part a bridge, George IV Bridge. George IV Bridge was built in 1836 to connect the Royal Mile to areas to the south, spanning the Cowgate. This was in the early 19th century, as Edinburgh was expanding. As we walk down George IV Bridge, we pass one of the famous Edinburgh buses, the number 23 to Trinity, and the building we see coming up on the left is the National Library of Scotland, one of the largest libraries in the United Kingdom, with an incredible amount of items, 24 million items, and 46,000 videos and films. The building was started in 1938, interrupted by the war, and completed in 1956. The architect Reginald Fairley designed it in the Art Deco style, very popular in the 1930s. And is a fantastic place to visit. It also has a lovely cafe inside. We're now turning into Victoria Street, better known as Diagon Alley from the Harry Potter series. The work you see going on is the construction of a 5-star hotel by the Virgin Group, owned by the entrepreneur Sir Richard Branson. It's going to be another fantastic addition to the hotels here in Edinburgh. Very popular here, Diagon Alley, with tourists. You can see the tourist there taking a selfie. It's one of the iconic shots, one of the many iconic shots of Edinburgh. And as you can see, it's a very, very pretty Victorian street. Again, this was built to link the Cowgate to the Royal Mile in Victorian times. Sadly, that's the end of the first part of our Edinburgh Old Town tour. But don't worry, we'll continue the tour in our next film, where we'll continue talking about Diagon Alley, the Grassmarket, Greyfriars Churchyard, Greyfriars Bobby, and of course, the amazing Edinburgh Castle. So we look forward to seeing you very soon. Well, thank you for joining me on my video here on my grand tour of Scotland. I hope you enjoyed it. We're going to be doing videos all over Scotland. Very exciting places. So I hope you look forward to that. But thank you for joining us today. God bless. I would love you to subscribe to my channel, and if you want to help me continue making these videos, you could maybe sponsor me on my Patreon page. Details below. Thank you.